Picture this. I'm sitting on my front porch at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains behind my house in shades of gold and pink. It's peaceful, quiet, the kind of moment that makes you grateful to be alive. Then I hear the crunch of gravel in my driveway, and my blood runs cold. 3 police cruisers. 3. Like I'm some kind of dangerous criminal. Behind them, a smug woman in a beige pantsuit steps out of a pristine white sedan, her arms crossed, wearing the kind of self-satisfied smile that makes your skin crawl. "That's him, officers," she announces, pointing at me like I'm a fugitive. "That's the man who's been illegally camping on residential property and violating our community standards." I look over at my modest travel trailer, the same one that had been legally parked in my own driveway for exactly 48 hours, and I realize something that chills me to the bone. This woman, this HOA president who I'd never even spoken to before, was trying to have me arrested on my own property. But here's what she didn't know, what none of them knew. That little trailer sitting in my driveway, it was about to change everything. Because sometimes, when you think you know all the rules, the universe has a way of teaching you there are bigger rules you never even considered. This is the story of how one vindictive HOA president tried to destroy my life, and how federal law turned her world upside down instead. My name is David, and 6 months before this nightmare began, I thought I'd found paradise. After 22 years in the Army, including 3 deployments overseas and more time away from family than I care to count, I'd finally retired with my full pension. My wife Sarah and I had been dreaming of this moment for years. We'd scrimp and save, living in cramped military housing, always talking about the house we'd buy when I got out, our forever home, a place where we could finally put down roots. When we found the house on Meadowbrook Lane, it felt like destiny. It was a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, sitting on a quarter-acre lot, with the most incredible view of the Cascade Mountains I'd ever seen. The neighborhood, Pine Ridge Estates, looked like something out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns, mature oak trees lining the streets, and houses that whispered of stability and the American dream. "This is it," Sarah had whispered, squeezing my hand as we stood in what would become our living room. "This is where we raise Emma and start our new life." Emma, our 8-year-old daughter, had immediately fallen in love with the big backyard and the rope swing hanging from the ancient oak tree. After years of military moves, constantly changing schools, and making new friends, she deserved stability. We all did. The HOA seemed like a bonus at first. The neighborhood was immaculate, property values were protected, and the monthly dues were reasonable at $150. During the buying process, we received a thick packet of covenants and restrictions, the usual stuff about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and no permanent structures without approval. Standard suburbia rules. Nothing that seemed unreasonable for people who just wanted a peaceful place to call home. Our real estate agent, a bubbly woman named Jennifer, had mentioned the HOA president in passing. "Oh, Margaret Henderson runs a tight ship," she'd said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She really cares about maintaining standards." I should have paid more attention to the way her smile faltered when she said it. The first few months were blissful. We threw ourselves into making the house ours. Sarah planted a garden with tomatoes and sunflowers. I built Emma a treehouse that took me 3 weekends and more trips to Home Depot than I care to admit. We hosted barbecues, met the neighbors, and for the first time in over 2 decades, I felt like I could breathe. The neighbors were mostly wonderful. There was Bill and Martha Thompson, a retired couple who lived next door and always had fresh cookies for Emma. Across the street were the Johnsons. Mike was a firefighter, and his wife Lisa was a nurse. They had kids around Emma's age, and before long, our kids were inseparable. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to have a military family in the neighborhood. People thanked me for my service, invited us to block parties, and made us feel welcome in a way that warmed my heart after so many years of temporary assignments. But there were whispers, Quiet conversations that stopped when I walked by. Nervous glances toward the pristine house at the end of the street, a sprawling McMansion with a circular driveway and not a blade of grass out of place. That's where Margaret Henderson lives, Bill had mentioned one evening as we shared a beer on his porch. She's intense about the HOA stuff. Real intense. Just keep your grass trimmed and your house painted, and you'll be fine. He'd said it casually, but I could see the wariness in his eyes. Still, I wasn't worried. I was a retired Army Sergeant Major. I'd managed military housing, inspections, followed regulations that would make your head spin, and kept equipment and personnel in line in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. How hard could suburban life be? That confidence lasted exactly until I decided to take my family on a camping trip. The idea came to me on a particularly stressful Tuesday in March. Sarah had been working extra shifts at the local hospital where she'd found a job as a nurse. Emma was struggling to adjust to her new school despite making friends, and I was feeling restless. Retirement, I was learning, wasn't as relaxing as I'd imagined. After 2 decades of structured military life, the freedom was almost overwhelming. You know what we need, I announced over dinner. A family adventure. What do you say we go camping in Olympic National Park for a long weekend? Just the 3 of us, some s'mores, and the great outdoors. Emma's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Really, Dad? Like real camping with a tent and everything? Even better, I said, my excitement building. I was thinking we could get a travel trailer, something we can use for weekend trips, family vacations, maybe even some longer adventures when you're out of school. Sarah looked skeptical. David, we just bought a house. Do we really need to spend money on a trailer too? But I could see the spark of interest in her eyes. After years of living on military bases, the idea of having our own mobile base camp for adventures was appealing. The next Saturday, we spent the day at Mountain View RV Sales, looking at used travel trailers. That's where I found her. A 2015 Airstream Flying Cloud 20. 5 feet of aluminum perfection. She'd been well maintained by her previous owner, a retiree who'd used her for cross-country trips before his health made traveling impossible. She's beautiful, Dad, Emma whispered, running her small hand along the curved aluminum siding. The salesman, a friendly guy named Pete, walked us through all the features. Solar panels on the roof, a full kitchen, a bathroom with a shower, and sleeping space for 4. She was everything we needed for family adventures, and the price was reasonable. I'll take her, I said, shaking Pete's hand. 2 weeks later, I drove my new trailer home, parking her carefully in our driveway. She fit perfectly. Our driveway was extra wide, and there was plenty of room between the trailer and the street. I'd measured twice to make sure she didn't block any sidewalks or extend into the road. That first night, Emma insisted we have practice camping in the driveway. We made hot dogs on the trailer's propane stove, told ghost stories, and slept under the stars through the trailer's skylight. It was magical. The next morning, I was washing breakfast dishes in the trailer's tiny sink when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the trailer window, I could see a woman standing on our front porch, tall, thin, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and wearing what looked like a business suit at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Sarah answered the door, and I could hear their voices through the open trailer windows. Good morning. I'm Margaret Henderson, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I need to speak with your husband about the recreational vehicle parked in your driveway. My stomach dropped. I climbed out of the trailer and walked over to join them on the porch. Mr. Miller, I presume? Margaret's voice was crisp, professional, and cold as winter wind. She was probably in her early 60s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog every imperfection around her. I'm here to inform you that recreational vehicles are not permitted to be parked in driveways in our community for more than 24 hours. I blinked, confused. I'm sorry, but I read through all the HOA documents when we bought the house. I didn't see anything about RV restrictions. Margaret's smile was thin and condescending. Perhaps you missed section 4.7 of the covenants. Recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, and commercial vehicles may not be parked in driveways or on the street for more than 24 consecutive hours. She handed me a formal notice printed on official letterhead. This is your first warning. The vehicle must be removed by 6 p.m. today, or you'll face a fine of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Sarah stepped closer to me, her nurse training kicking in as she tried to escalate the situation. Mrs. Henderson, we certainly don't want to violate any rules. Could you show us exactly where this restriction is written? We'd be happy to comply once we understand the specifics. Margaret's expression hardened. Mrs. Miller, ignorance of the covenants is not an excuse for violation. The document is quite clear. Your husband should have read it more carefully before making his purchase. Something in her tone, the dismissive way she spoke to my wife, the assumption that I was some kind of rule-breaking troublemaker, triggered my military training. I dealt with difficult superior officers before, and I knew the best approach was calm, professional documentation. Ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you could point me to the exact section you're referencing. I'd like to review the language myself and make sure I understand the policy correctly. For just a moment, something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Uncertainty, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. The covenants are available online through the HOA website. You have until 6 p.m. today. She turned on her heel and walked back to her white sedan without another word. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours poring over every page of the HOA covenants. Sarah helped, and we even enlisted Emma to help us search for keywords. We found restrictions on commercial vehicles, rules about boat storage, and guidelines for temporary structures. But nowhere, absolutely nowhere, could we find section 4.7 or any mention of recreational vehicles. At 5:45 p.m., I called the number on Margaret's business card. It went straight to voicemail. Mrs. Henderson, this is David Miller from Meadowbrook Lane. I've reviewed the covenants extensively and cannot locate section 4.7 or any restriction on RV parking. Could you please provide me with the specific document and page number where this rule appears? Thank you. The next morning, there was another notice on my door. This one was a formal fine, $100 for failure to comply with recreational vehicle restrictions. It referenced the same mysterious section, 4.7. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules or community standards. This was personal. Margaret Henderson had decided she didn't like my trailer, and she was going to use her position as HOA president to force me to get rid of it, whether the rules supported her or not. I called an emergency meeting with Bill Thompson, who'd served on the HOA board before Margaret took over. Dave, I'm going to be straight with you, Bill said, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as we sat in his kitchen. Margaret's been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for 3 years now. She's driven out 2 families already with her harassment. The Petersons had to sell their house because she fined them into bankruptcy over a fence dispute. The Williams family moved after. She called code enforcement on them for a children's playhouse that she claimed was an unauthorized structure. But the rules have to mean something, I protested. She can't just make them up as she goes along. Bill sighed. She's got the backing of her cronies on the board. They rubber stamp whatever she wants, and most people are too intimidated or too busy to fight her. It's easier to just comply, even when she's wrong. Well, I'm not most people, I said, feeling that familiar military resolve kick in. I've fought for this country for 22 years. I'm not about to be bullied on my own property by someone who can't even cite the rules correctly. But Margaret was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, the fines kept coming. $100 per day, accumulating relentlessly. When I continued to demand documentation of the rule I was supposedly violating, she expanded her harassment campaign. Suddenly, I was receiving violations for things that had never been issues before. My grass was 0.5 inches too long. The color of my mailbox post was not in compliance with approved colors, even though it was the same color as half the mailboxes on the street. The small American flag I'd hung from my porch was improperly displayed, according to unspecified flag protocols. Each violation came with its own fine: $50 for the grass, $75 for the mailbox, $100 for the flag. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and I could see the stress wearing on my family. Sarah started having trouble sleeping. Emma asked if we were going to have to move again like we did in the Army. The joy we'd felt in our new home was being systematically destroyed by one vindictive woman with too much power and not enough oversight. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in April. I walked outside to get the newspaper and found Margaret Henderson standing in my driveway with a measuring tape, photographing my trailer from every angle. "Excuse me," I called out, "but what exactly are you doing on my property?" She didn't even look up from her camera, documenting violations. "This recreational vehicle extends 6.3 feet beyond the approved driveway setback." "What approved setback? According to what document?" Finally, she looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. Pure, unadulterated hatred. "Mr. Miller, your disrespect for this community's standards is appalling. Your military background doesn't give you the right to ignore our rules." My military background taught me to follow legitimate rules and question illegitimate orders, I replied, my voice steady despite my growing anger. "Show me the rule, Margaret. Show me one legitimate document that supports any of these violations." Her face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I'll have you know that I've been protecting property values in this neighborhood for what? 3 years? I've been protecting American freedoms for 22 years. And the last time I checked, property rights and due process were pretty fundamental American freedoms." That's when she played her ace. "We'll see about that," she hissed. "I'm calling the police. You're harassing me, and that trailer is a safety hazard blocking emergency access." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Go ahead and call them. I'd love to have an official witness to your harassment campaign." But even as I said it, a cold dread settled in my stomach, because I was starting to realize that Margaret Henderson wasn't just petty and vindictive. She was smart, connected, and absolutely ruthless. And she wasn't done with me yet. The police arrived the next morning, and that's where we started this story. 3 cruisers in my driveway at 6 a.m., Margaret standing behind them like she just captured America's most wanted. Officer Rodriguez, the lead policeman, was professional but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He listened to Margaret's rambling complaint about illegal camping, safety hazards, and community standards, then walked over to examine my trailer. "Sir, I need to ask, are you living in this trailer?" "No, officer. It's parked in my driveway on my property. I use it for family camping trips." He nodded, making notes. "Is it connected to any utilities? Sewer, electrical, water?" "No, sir. It's completely self-contained. Solar power, fresh water tank, waste tank." Officer Rodriguez walked around the trailer, checking its position relative to the street and sidewalk. "Ma'am," he called to Margaret, "I'm not seeing any code violations here. The vehicle is on private property. It's not blocking traffic or emergency access, and there are no utility connections that would indicate permanent occupancy." Margaret's face was turning an alarming shade of purple. "Officer, this is a residential neighborhood. People can't just park recreational vehicles wherever they want. There are community standards." "Ma'am, community standards don't supersede property rights or city code. As long as the vehicle is legally parked on private property and not creating a public safety issue, there's nothing we can do." I should have felt vindicated, but something in Margaret's expression told me this was far from over. As the police drove away, she stood in my driveway for a long Moment, staring at my trailer with undisguised fury. "This isn't finished, Mr. Miller," she said quietly. "I will not allow you to destroy the character of this neighborhood." That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to react to Margaret's attacks, I was going to go on the offense. Time to do some research. I started with the obvious places: the county clerk's office, the city planning department, and the state attorney general's website for information about HOA regulations. What I found was disturbing, but not surprising. Margaret had been filing complaints against me with multiple agencies, claiming everything from zoning violations to illegal dumping my trailer's gray water tank, apparently. But more interesting were the financial records I found. As president of the HOA, Margaret was required to file annual reports with the state. The numbers didn't add up. With 47 homes paying $150 per month in dues, the HOA should have been collecting over $84,000 per year. But the reported expenses seemed inflated, and there was no detailed accounting of where the money was going. I dug deeper. Margaret's husband owned a landscaping company that had an exclusive contract with the HOA worth $40,000 per year, nearly half our total budget. Her brother-in-law's law firm was listed as the HOA's legal counsel with fees that seemed excessive for a small residential community. Then I found a smoking gun, hidden in a folder of meeting minutes from 2 years ago. Was a record of a vote to amend the covenants to add restrictions on recreational vehicles. The vote had failed 4-3, with most board members feeling the restriction was unnecessary and overly restrictive. But somehow, Margaret was enforcing a rule that didn't legally exist. I spent the weekend documenting everything: financial irregularities, conflicts of interest, enforcement of non-existent rules, and what appeared to be a pattern of selective harassment designed to drive out residents who questioned her authority. Monday morning, I called my old Army buddy Jake Morrison, who'd become a lawyer after his service. When I explained the situation, he was quiet for a long moment. "Dave, what you're describing sounds like embezzlement and abuse of fiduciary duty. But more than that, if she's enforcing rules that don't exist and filing false complaints with government agencies, you might have grounds for a harassment lawsuit. What do you think I should do? Document everything, every fine, every false complaint, every interaction. And, Dave, don't pay those fines. If the rules don't exist, the fines aren't legitimate. But be prepared. If you're right about this woman, she's going to escalate hard when she realizes you're not backing down." Jake was right. Margaret escalated. The next morning, there was a certified letter waiting for me. Inside was a lien notice against my property for unpaid HOA fines and assessments totaling $3,847.50. According to the letter, if the amount wasn't paid within 30 days, the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings. My hand shook as I read it. She was trying to take my house, the home Sarah and I had dreamed about for 22 years, the place where we were finally going to put down roots, where Emma was going to grow up. Margaret Henderson was trying to steal it over a parking dispute based on rules that didn't exist. That night, I called an emergency family meeting. "Sarah, Emma, I need you both to understand what's happening here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "This woman is trying to take our house. She's filed a lien based on fines for rules that don't exist." Emma, wise beyond her 8 years after a childhood of military moves and adult conversations she shouldn't have had to hear, looked at me with serious eyes. "Dad, are we going to have to move again?" The question broke my heart. "No, sweetheart, we're not moving. This is our home, and nobody's going to take it from us. But Daddy's going to have to fight for it." Sarah took my hand. "What do you need from us?" "I need you to trust me, and I need you to be prepared for things to get worse before they get better. This woman has made this personal, and she's not going to stop until one of us is destroyed. But I didn't survive 3 deployments and 22 years in the Army to be defeated by a suburban tyrant. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to take Margaret Henderson down, and I was going to do it using the one thing she hadn't counted on: the fact that sometimes local rules don't matter when federal law is on your side. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Emma's new friend Jake Johnson, the firefighter's son from across the street, mentioned during a play date that his grandfather had been a park ranger. When I mentioned my situation to Mike Johnson, he got a thoughtful look on his face. "You know, Dave, my dad spent 30 years with the National Park Service. He's retired now, but he still knows all the regulations inside and out. Want me to ask him about your situation?" 3 days later, I was sitting in the Johnsons' living room across from Robert Johnson, a weathered man in his 70s with sharp eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades working outdoors. "Son, tell me about this trailer of yours," he said after Mike explained my situation. I described my Airstream in detail: the solar panels, the self-contained systems, the fact that it never connected to utilities or discharged waste. Robert nodded slowly. "And you've been using it for camping trips?" "Yes, sir. Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier, a few state parks. Nothing but legitimate recreational use." "Any overnight stays on federal land?" I thought about our camping trips. "Yes, sir. We've spent several nights at campgrounds in Olympic and Mount Rainier." Robert's eyes lit up. "Mike, get me that box of regulations from the garage. The one marked federal." 20 minutes later, Robert looked up from a thick binder with a grin that reminded me of a cat who just spotted a very plump canary. "Dave, I think your HOA president just made a very expensive mistake. Tell me, have you ever heard of the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association federal standards?" I shook my head. "Well, your Airstream meets all the federal standards for a recreational vehicle as defined by the Department of Transportation and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. More importantly, the Federal Highway Administration has very specific rules about what constitutes a recreational vehicle and how they can be regulated by local authorities." He pulled out a highlighted section of regulations. "According to federal law, any vehicle that meets the definition of a recreational vehicle, which yours clearly does, cannot be prohibited from residential driveways by local ordinances as long as it's not connected to utilities and is used for legitimate recreational purposes." My heart started pounding. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that even if your HOA had a legitimate rule about RV parking, which it sounds like they don't, they couldn't enforce it against a federally defined recreational vehicle used for legitimate camping. Federal law supersedes local covenants." Robert stood up and walked to his desk. "But there's more. If this woman has been filing false complaints with government agencies, claiming your RV is being used as a permanent residence or violating zoning laws, she may have committed federal crimes. Filing false reports with federal agencies is a felony." He handed me a business card. "This is my old supervisor, Janet Martinez. She's the regional coordinator for the Park Service now, but she still handles RV compliance issues. Tell her I sent you, and ask her to review your situation." The next morning, I called Janet Martinez. When I explained my situation and mentioned Robert Johnson's name, her tone became very interested. "Mr. Miller, what you're describing sounds like a clear case of local authorities exceeding their jurisdiction over federally regulated vehicles. Would you be willing to file a formal complaint?" "Ma'am, I'll file any complaint that will help me keep my home and protect my family from this harassment." "Good. I'm going to send a park ranger to inspect your vehicle and document the situation. If what you're telling me is accurate, we may need to involve the U.S. Attorney's Office." 3 days later, Park Ranger Jennifer Kim arrived at my house in an official National Park Service vehicle. She was young, professional, and thorough. She spent an hour examining my Airstream, reviewing my camping receipts and permits, and documenting everything with photographs and detailed notes. "Mr. Miller, your vehicle clearly meets all federal standards for a recreational vehicle, and your usage pattern is exactly what these regulations are designed to protect. I'll be filing a report with our regional office recommending immediate federal intervention. As she was packing up her equipment, Margaret Henderson's white sedan pulled into my driveway behind the Ranger's truck. Margaret climbed out, took one look at the federal vehicle and the Ranger's uniform, and her face went white. "Excuse me, officer, but what's going on here?" Ranger Kim turned to face her, and I saw something in the young woman's expression that told me she'd dealt with bullies before. "Ma'am, I'm conducting an official inspection of this recreational vehicle in response to a federal complaint about local interference with interstate commerce and federally regulated vehicles." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "Federal complaint?" "Yes, ma'am. It appears that local authorities have been attempting to regulate a federally protected recreational vehicle beyond their legal jurisdiction. Are you the HOA president who's been filing these complaints?" I watched Margaret's face cycle through confusion, anger, and growing fear. I've been enforcing community standards. This man has been violating our covenants." Ranger Kim consulted her tablet. "Ma'am, according to our investigation, you've filed complaints with the county zoning office, the state environmental agency, and the city code enforcement office, claiming this vehicle is being used as an illegal residence. Is that correct?" It's parked illegally. "Ma'am, this vehicle is legally parked on private property and meets all federal standards for recreational vehicles. It's not connected to utilities, and our records show it's been used for legitimate camping activities in federal parks. Your complaints appear to be false." The color drained from Margaret's face entirely. "False? I was protecting the neighborhood." "Ma'am, filing false reports with government agencies is a serious offense. I'd recommend you consult with legal counsel." After Ranger Kim left, I watched Margaret sit in her car for a long time, staring at my house with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Fear. That afternoon, I received a phone call from Janet Martinez. "Mr. Miller, based on our investigation, we're recommending that the U.S. Attorney's Office open a federal investigation into the false complaints filed against you. Additionally, we're sending a cease and desist letter to your HOA demanding they stop all enforcement actions related to your recreational vehicle." "What does this mean for the lien on my property?" "Any lien based on enforcement of illegitimate rules against a federally protected vehicle would be invalid. You should consult with an attorney about having it removed and possibly filing for damages." That evening, I called Jake Morrison with an update. When I finished explaining about the federal investigation, he was quiet for a moment. "Dave, you realize what this means, right? If federal authorities determine that Margaret filed false reports and abused her position to harass you, you don't just get your house back. You get to sue her, the HOA, and probably every board member who supported her for civil rights violations under federal law." "What kind of damages are we talking about?" "Treble damages under federal civil rights statutes, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for harassment." "Dave, if this goes the way I think it's going to go, Margaret Henderson isn't just going to lose her HOA presidency. She's going to lose everything." The next morning, I woke up to find Margaret Henderson standing on my porch again. But this time was different. She wasn't wearing her usual business suit. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking as she held an envelope. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to speak with you." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Sarah was watching from the window, her phone ready to call 911 if things went badly. "I'm dropping all the fines," Margaret said quickly. "All of them. And I'm removing the lien on your property." She thrust the envelope at me with trembling hands. "This is a formal letter from the HOA board rescinding all enforcement actions against you and acknowledging that your recreational vehicle is in full compliance with all applicable regulations." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "Margaret, why are you doing this?" She looked up at me, and I saw something I never expected to see in her eyes. Genuine fear. Because my lawyer told me that if federal prosecutors decide to pursue charges for filing false reports, I could face up to 5 years in federal prison. And if you decide to sue me for civil rights violations, I could lose my house, my husband's business, everything we've worked for. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the stress I'd put my family through, the attempt to steal my home over rules that didn't exist. Margaret, for 6 months you've tried to destroy my family over a parking dispute. You've harassed us, filed false complaints, and tried to take our home. And you did it all because you didn't like the way my trailer looked in my own driveway. She nodded, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. I know. I got carried away. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I realized now that I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I looked at this woman who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable just days before, and realized that bullies are always strongest when their victims don't know how to fight back. Margaret, I'm going to accept this apology and these documents. But I want you to understand something. If you ever harass me, my family, or any other resident of this neighborhood again, I won't hesitate to pursue every legal remedy available to me, federal and state, civil and criminal. Are we clear? She nodded frantically. Yes, absolutely. And Mr. Miller? I'm resigning as HOA president, effective immediately. 6 months later, Pine Ridge Estates is a different place. Margaret Henderson and her husband moved away 3 weeks after our confrontation. Apparently, the shame of having the federal government investigate her for harassment was too much to bear in a community where she'd once wielded so much power. Their house sold quickly at a significant loss, and the new owners, a young couple with twin toddlers, seemed much more interested in raising their family than policing their neighbors' driveways. The HOA elected a new board, led by Mike Johnson, the firefighter from across the street. Their first act was to formally review and clarify all community covenants, ensuring that every rule was legitimate, clearly written, and fairly enforced. They also implemented new financial oversight procedures after discovering that Margaret had indeed been funneling HOA funds to her husband's landscaping company at inflated rates. As for me, I never did file that federal lawsuit. With Margaret gone and the harassment stopped, my family was finally able to enjoy the peace we'd been seeking. Sometimes the threat of consequences is more powerful than the consequences themselves. But the trailer? She's still sitting in my driveway, and she's never been happier. Last weekend, we took her on a 2-week adventure through Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. Emma learned to fish in pristine mountain streams. Sarah reconnected with her love of hiking, and I remembered why I'd fallen in love with this country during my years of service. The irony isn't lost on me that the very thing Margaret Henderson tried to force me to get rid of, my eyesore trailer that was supposedly destroying the neighborhood character, became the symbol of something much more important: the right to use and enjoy your own property, the right to stand up to bullies, whether they wear uniforms or business suits or carry clipboards and measuring tapes. I learned something important through this whole experience. Most bullies, whether they're playground tyrants or HOA presidents, rely on their victims not knowing their rights. They count on intimidation, on the assumption that people will comply rather than fight back. Margaret Henderson made the classic mistake of assuming that because she held a position of authority in our small community, she could ignore the laws and regulations that applied to everyone else. But here's the thing about America that I love, even after seeing its flaws during my military service: there's always a bigger rule. There's always a higher authority. And sometimes, when local tyrants think they have all the power, they forget that in a nation of laws, federal trumps local every single time. Emma asks me sometimes why I didn't just move the trailer when Mrs. Henderson first complained. It would have been easier, Dad. Why did you fight so hard? I tell her the same thing I tell every veteran I meet who's struggling with civilian life. After military service, Sometimes the fight isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about making sure the next person doesn't have to fight at all. The young family who bought Margaret's house has 2 little girls who ride their bikes up and down Meadowbrook Lane every evening. Their parents wave at us from their front yard, where they've planted a garden that would have given Margaret nightmares, wildflowers mixed with vegetables, a child's art project painted on the fence, and a rope swing hanging from their oak tree. It's messier than Margaret's version of perfection. It's louder, more chaotic, and completely wonderful. And every morning when I sit on my porch with my coffee, watching Emma play in our backyard while my beautiful Airstream gleams in the driveway, I'm reminded that home isn't about perfect lawns or matching mailboxes or following rules that don't make sense. Home is about the freedom to live your life, raise your family, and pursue your dreams without fear of harassment from petty tyrants who mistake authority for power and control for leadership. My name is David Miller, and this is my home. And as long as federal law protects the rights of Americans to park their legally owned recreational vehicles on their own property, that shiny aluminum trailer is going to sit right where she belongs, in my driveway, ready for our next adventure. Because sometimes, when you stand up to bullies, you discover that the system actually works the way it's supposed to. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win.